share with me what they have found. So I coach the students until they are comfortable with their presentation and they present. So you're not really during that session, they are the teachers. Okay. Now the lesson plan, for example, in 15 minutes, 20 minutes could be devoted, for the show. 10 minutes could be devoted for the Q&A session, and 10 minutes could be devoted to the game or the quiz. And then 10 minutes could be devoted to the notes rewriting and to the feedback uploading. So when you have 50 minutes, it could be simply split along these lines. Now the last one, as I mentioned earlier, I'll show you some samples, but as I mentioned earlier, when students present, the other students are not simply passively listening. So active listening requires that they interact with the speaker. So I do workshops on notes taking. I talk to them about notes taking. I show the importance of notes taking. I get, professionals to kind of also do some coaching from the university about notes taking. So notes taking is very important. So during those presentations, I ask them to take notes. Okay. And then they also, after they take notes, they rewrite the notes in the format of short paragraphs. And then, of course, you remind them of the short paragraph with the topic sentence, support, and concluding sentence, and so on and so forth. So the more they write, the more they get also feedback from me, and the more they improve their the structure of their writing, especially the paragraph structure. And after they finish with the rewriting, they also write some feedback to the presenters, to their classmates. So they highlight the areas of success and the areas of improvement, and then I'll share also that with you. Okay. So before the session, what happens is that the students review the chapter, and the students send questions to the presenters. And then Slido.com has been a very useful online tool, because Slido.com gives you a space where you introduce an event, and then students can go and give it a number. So students can sign into Slido.com and then sign into that particular event, and then write their questions. And immediately everyone can see the other questions, so they don't repeat the same questions, and so on and so forth. So presenters prepare the answers and select the most suitable method in terms of answering them separately or answering them during the presentation. Okay, so this is a sample from Slido. So Slido, you see the basic information. It's so there is an event, you give it the name. I usually write the names of the students so they can see, oh, this is their event. It's important for them to appropriate, the session, to appropriate the event, so their names are there, and there is the date, and there is a code. Okay, and then in the code you can see the H and the G. The H and the G are the H for Hadi and the G for Ghaith. You can see. So usually I try to personalize the code so that it is it reflects a little bit the students, and this is sent to the students, so everyone signs in to Slido.com and upload their questions. Okay, so that's one also way of interacting. Now during the talk show session, so students are really given a handout. I'll show you a sample, and asked to perform the following tasks. Usually they take notes, as I mentioned earlier. They rewrite the notes in short paragraphs, and they write some feedback highlighting areas of success and improvement. Okay, and sometimes they're called upon to ask their questions, because during the talk show there are questions that they had already sent. So to maximize interaction, I tell them, this question is asked by Mariam, so tell Mariam, post the question and tell Mariam, could you read your question? And so everyone is waiting for the name to appear and for the question to appear, so that they can read the question. And that's also maximizing interaction. Nobody will be asleep. Okay. Now, of course, students are encouraged to find interesting names to their shows. You can see that this one is called The Daily Show. It's unfortunate that we won't be able to show samples, but it's a very interesting show. You can see this is the sample, but we won't be able to see it. This is another sample of another show, the Engineering Morning Show, simply because it's an engineering writing for professional writing for engineers. So that's why it's the Engineering Morning Show. You can see these are radio shows. You can see the title of the show, the Scholar Talk Show, sample, but we won't be able to hear it, unfortunately. So the show is based on questions received. This is a way the students decided. They saw so many questions, and all the questions will cover all the areas of their show. So they decided that the whole show will be a Q&A. So the questions of the students, and then they will simply, respond to it. Okay. A sample of another show called The Grammar Show. Another sample of a podcast. Now I'll share with you some handout. So this is the handout that I give, that I share with students. So a little bit of background: as a young academic working on consolidating effective communication skills, active listening and summarization skills are of a paramount importance. So they write their names, they write the show title, they write also the host, the host and the guest. So they write their names, and the second page will have here a space for the notes. So they take notes on the first one, and then they write summaries on the basis of the notes, and then they provide also feedback. And so this is where they highlight what they liked most about the show, and then the areas of improvement. And this particular sections, as I will explain maybe a little bit later, is important because this will trigger a second round of interaction. Because the feedback is not the end of the tunnel. The feedback will prompt the presenters to read it and then react to it. So this way, there will be another round, of discussion. So this is a sample, like talk show notes from the students, and this is a sample of short paragraphs rewriting. And you can see the students, they appropriate, professions. They become Dr. ML, Dr. Maryam, Maram. So you can see that they don't use necessarily their titles. So they introduce themselves as experts in that particular area. Okay, so this is the feedback, paragraph. We will see more of this. Today's presentation was great. The visuals and the way they showed the presentation was very good. I like the transitions between parts and the way they had information for us to see and read while they explained more about them. The information was very useful as a listener and engineer. So you can see that as a listener and engineer, and the information was useful, you can see that they connect, they relate, they try to kind of introduce, be active, really listeners. I really liked how the quiz part of the presentation, was done. Audience were involved in a very smart way, and it was a great idea to do. A great idea to do because I asked them to vary, and there are so many, online, ideas and formats and resources when it comes to kind of do some sort of an interactive quiz. So usually they try to impress each other with something new. One comment I would like to talk about is about the answering the question part. If only the answers were more detailed, it would be much better. Overall, they did a great job today. So the area of improvement here, you can see it's the answering. Okay, so in terms of the presenters, the second task is the Q&A. Okay. Now this Q&A session has also been extremely important. Why? Because first, not only it has interaction, but because they receive it ahead of time, so they have to design some strategies, and they have time to do so. And as you will see, I mean, all different types of social media were utilized. And I was very happy, and I think it'll be nice to share this with you. Okay. So sometimes the questions are displayed and students are called to read them. Sometimes the questions are read as tweets. Questions are shown to have received viral status on tweet networks. Questions are received as instant messages, and questions are received through instant or recorded phone calls. You can see everything has been used, from the phone calls to actual, reading to tweets to messages. I'll show you. These are, for example, samples. So the students, they only uploaded them, onto into a network, but then the presenters decided to display them differently. Okay, so you can see all these different social media and phone resources networks. So they show these questions, they show the names, and the phone also rings, and someone asks the question. Okay. So most importantly, any student may be called, on to read their question anytime. Thus, each one is waiting for their turn. So during the presentation, no one leaves, no one goes, and there is time for taking notes, and that's interaction. But then there is time for reading the question, or waiting for your name to be called for something. Okay, and then there is time to do a game. Okay. So the third task of the presenters is the game. Okay, and this is also, I have to say that students have tried all types of games, which has been a pleasure to witness, a pleasure to encourage, and also a pleasure to congratulate them. Okay, so these are just a few samples, from the Jeopardy game to the word puzzle game to the crisscross game to the quizzes.com game to the kahoot.com game to the ahaslides.com game to the menti.com game. So so many different types of games have been tried, and these are just samples of some of those questions and answers. And then, of course, the winners, the performers, first, second, and third are displayed. Okay. More of samples. So the online prizes are given to winners. So I usually tell them, okay, it's okay to tell them. I had someone who provided really vouchers at some point. He said, okay, I'm giving $10 voucher for this, and this. And he told them from the beginning, so they had to kind of pay attention more. So you can see in terms of names that are displayed, and students at the end of the day, at the end of the session, are also very happy. So let me go to the last item, which is the reaction to the feedback. Okay. So presenters are asked to react to their classmates' feedback through a short oral presentation. So this presentation triggers another presentation, and the other presentation picks up on the communication from the first presentations, hence the ongoing communicative cycle. And this is what I call the communicative model, the interaction model. where it doesn't stop from the first direction. So it goes on with feedback, with reaction to feedback, and so on and so forth. Okay. So I'm going to just show you some samples. So this is what you see on the left side is the summary that I sent to students, which represent the feedback that they got from their classmates. And then I asked them to write a short reaction. And this is just a writing assignment. But then later on, I asked them that the following week they present a short presentation where they do a synthesis of most common, like this one, for example. All the positive feedback and like good pace, entertaining, opinions in Q&A, slides were appealing, adapted technical difficulties. Negative feedback, I told them don't put the word negative, it's areas of improvement. So technical issues, too vague, tone, Q&A session. You can see that they do a little summary and then they communicate that to their classmates. Some other samples of such reaction to the feedback, really. So they highlight areas of success and areas of improvement. I'm interested in the engaging, creative, informative, beneficial, innovative. So you can see that students are writing about their classmates. Remember, this is not, assessing the teacher's performance. This is assessing their classmates. And the students who usually receive this, this feedback are in most cases like thrilled. This is the first time we have such feedback from our peers, right? And so for areas of improvement, like you see here, we ensure that our next episodes will be free from past mistakes. So they take the areas of improvement with a positive spirit, like lessons learned. I did a little bit of quantitative analysis in the terms of I looked at frequency words in such format. You can see interesting, clear, fast, successful, good, fun, entertaining. The frequency of such words. It's important for us to kind of when we collect some data from students, when we have input. Of course, we get their approval, and then we check. We do a little bit of analysis to see, what's common, what needs to be improvement, and so on and so forth. So this is feedback. It is oral, but so unfortunately the sound won't work. So also in terms of production, the notes, I looked at the notes. You can see some of them are limited with notes taking. Some others are extremely, extremely elaborate and generous with notes taking. When I looked at the summaries, again, you can see some are limited with summaries and some are highly articulate with summaries. And then I shared this with them. So I tell them after the second, let's say, assignment, okay, this is what's going on. So some of you write more than others, and it's good to try to catch up, to try to improve, so that by the end of the semester, all of you will be beyond the 1,000 words and so on and so forth. Okay, and this particular pie chart shows a little bit like the amount each one had written in total. Okay, so I shared with them. You can see from 8.9% to 8.7%, all the way to 2%. So those who wrote more, who were very generous with writing, we're talking about the notes, the summaries, and the feedback all together. So it's at the end of the day, it's a writing assignment, it's a communicative assignment, it's also a reflection assignment. Okay. I also run some satisfaction surveys. The talk show presentation activity encourages creativity. You can see 55% ticked, like very much, from very much to no. And then you can see that the majority, the talk show experience has been highly beneficial, the extremely and the very, when you put them together, all the way to you can always have also, of course, you will always have 5 to 10% of students who kind of, resist the change, who show a little bit of disengagement, but the majority engage well. Even online, the talk show activity continued to promote creative learning. You can see the results are quite encouraging. I strongly recommend the use of the talk show model in group presentations. You can see that most of them also do. Okay. Let me just finish quickly with this. In the evaluation of the course, this is anonymous and no one sees this. You can see that the question to my learning experience in this course was positive, was really 4.55 out of 5. So in terms of experience, you can see most students have really enjoyed this, right? I would just to finish with some presenters' feedback. The presentation style in the form of an interactive activity is appealing because you can catch the attention of the audience more easily. The talk show enables us to talk more openly and freely to express our ideas, and removes a little of the burden that comes in the form of anxiety when presenting. I think that this presentation style is more suitable for the student because there is more open discussion and debate rather than someone lecturing. Both of us are usually uncomfortable with presentations, so this style of presenting has helped us overcome our fear of public speaking, as this requires a conversation with our audience. This is a point that I brought up earlier. It came in the comments of the students, so the students had the opportunity to also provide feedback for their own experience. Overall, the talk show helped improve my oral presentation skills and made me want to improve on some of the skills I lacked, be it in presenting or structuring sentences. I have grown and learned so much throughout my journey in this course, and I am pleased to know that the people around me are noticing it too. So people around me are noticing it too. This is coming from the feedback that I shared with them, because usually in a class, students don't know what others think about their performance. Okay. So in the presentation, you can see some other comments. You can see the word surprisingly memorable experience, and so on and so forth. And so to summarize a little bit, this particular pedagogy really improves what we call active learning, improves what we call collaborative learning, improves what we call student-centered learning, and also differentiation and personalization, because each one chooses their own style, and each one is pretty much addressed when they send their own questions, when they express their concerns. It is it is there. I mean, this particular to be continued after the
Dr.
short break.
We've got about 2 minutes left.
We're done. I'm
done.
done.
Are we? Fantastic. And I've been following the chat. People have been really appreciative of you sharing your experience and your knowledge. And I think people are super keen to get the slides afterwards so they can start implementing some of the things that you've suggested. So I do want to get a question in, if I can.
Sure.
And there are a few in here, so I think afterwards it'd be great if we can share them with you for you to answer, and we can circulate the answers.
Sure.
But there's one from Jisramel Menesis. How is their academic achievement affected by this strategy? So what kind of tangible results have you seen in their outcomes?
Yeah, I would like to say that it came from the dean. After a few semesters, the dean said, "I noticed some students are scoring a little bit, higher than before," and I would like to say that with a format where there is learning and the joy, the learning becomes effective. So students testify to the fact that they're enjoying what they are learning, and I think the more they're engaged with the material, the more they understand it, the more they perform better. And maybe if the question, I'm doing it with some courses, but I would like to see this with math, with physics, with engineering, where students also play a major part. And I think this dialogic pedagogy not only plays a role in boosting students' interaction and classroom engagement, but also effective learning. So just to answer your question, yes, there are traces of improving learning through improving, grades at the end of the semester, because they master more the content when they get involved and when they connect to it. Some publication soon will probably answer this question with some evidence.
Right. Well, we will be looking forward to that for sure. So I just want to say thank you very much. And I know the team, the many hundreds of participants are wanting to have visibility of the deck, and I know we'll be sharing all the materials, or a selection of the materials, over the next coming week. So I just want to say a big thank you, Dr. Behlul and team, for supporting. I believe I'm now we're handing the baton over to Dr. Hisham for our next session. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the program. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks, Dr. Mahab, for the interesting presentation. Good morning, everybody, from my side. Good morning, wherever you are, really. Good afternoon to everybody, and greetings from Cambridge Assessment English. It is such a pleasure to welcome you all, and thank you again for joining us today. My name is Hisham Al-Sagbini. I lead on areas related to assessment services and recognition at the regional office in Dubai. And it's really exciting, really, to see so many educators coming together virtually to share their experiences and research from all over the world. In this part of the presentation, in this part of the conference, I'm delighted to introduce two established colleagues based in the United Arab Emirates. First, I've got Professor Dr. Christina Gitaki. Professor Christina is a research coordinator at the Center of Educational Innovation at Zayed University. Over the past few years, Christina served in various roles, including UNESCO Chair in Applied Research and Education in the UAE, and the Dean of the Foundation Programs at the Higher College of Technology. She is an established researcher, and in her current role at the Center of Innovation, she oversees SUBL initiative, the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, which is the topic that she will be talking about today. In the second half of the presentation, we will have Dr. Aisha Al-Shamsi. Dr. Aisha works as an assistant professor at the Higher College of Technology, Faculty of Education in the United Arab Emirates. Dr. Aisha received her master's in curriculum and instructions and PhD from the United Arab Emirates University, with an emphasis on language education and literacy. Her research interests on mainly literacy, bilingualism, and practice-based approach in learning. Dr. Aisha will be sharing her research on Emirati female college students' experience on virtual learning environment, virtual learning communities of inquiry. With that, let me pass it over to Dr. Christina first, of what promises to be a very insightful session. I'll be back at the end of the presentation for any questions you may have. So I look forward to that. Over to you, Dr. Christina.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hisham. Let me just share my presentation. Okay, I hope everybody can hear me and see me all right. So today's session, I will actually approach the theme of the conference from the perspective of someone that designs professional development programs for faculty working in higher education. I will first say a few words about the context of the UAE. I can see a lot of participants from around the world, so I want them to have an idea of the challenges that we're facing in this region with regards to language. And then I will talk about the professional development program that we have designed at Zayed University, which is where I work, and what we aim to accomplish with the program and what we have accomplished so far. So the UAE, United Arab Emirates, it's a country that is home to people from over 200 nationalities, with the local Emirati population comprising just over 11% of the population. As you can see from just that little statement, bilingualism is a major topic in this region that applied linguists are grappling with, trying to find best ways to implement an effective bilingual program within the education sectors of the UAE. Apart from the federal institutions, like the one that I work in, there are also 79 private higher education institutions. Apart from the public schools, there are also more than 200 private schools, at least in the Emirate of Dubai. The institutions and the private schools with the British curricula, American curricula, they use English as the medium of instruction. As a result, language and language proficiency permeate every aspect of learning and education. So while what I'm going to say today is not specific to English language teachers, it is specific to faculty working with Emirati students who need to become fully bilingual in order to be able to function within a society that is home to such a large array of nationalities and languages. At my center, I work at the Center for Educational Innovation. Our aim is to design and deliver professional development programs in order to support our faculty in being effective teachers. We work with English language teachers because we have a large English language and applied linguistics program, but we also work with faculty who are not language educators. They are experts in their field. They don't have training on how to teach, and even more, they don't have training in how to teach students, Emirati students, whose first language is Arabic, and they are learning in a second language, in English. So they find themselves that they have to support their students with language so that the students are in a position to successfully access the academic content of the whatever courses they are teaching. So the challenges they're facing are quite significant, and my center design programs to support faculty in those efforts. Now, what kind of programs we use and how do we support professional development? We use a variety. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to reshape my screen so I can see the slides. We use a variety of different models, but the one that I use for the program that I will be describing today is towards the end of the continuum that addresses teacher professional development from a transformational perspective, where the teacher initiates professional development opportunities and actively tries to improve their teaching practice and bring innovation into their teaching practice. So the framework that I use is called SOTL, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. I've used this visual to position SOTL within the realm of teaching. Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is, and the SOTL practitioners are faculty in higher education who are engaged in not only improving their teaching by consuming other people's research, so by going to conferences like this one, seeing what other people are doing with their teaching, trying to emulate best practice and model other successful teachers' strategies in the classroom so that they can improve their own teaching in the classroom. The SOTL practitioners, those involved in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, don't just consume such research, but they also produce such research. In other words, they are actively engaging in researching their own teaching practice so that they can monitor the effectiveness of what they do in the classroom so they can best support their students in their learning efforts. So SOTL, field of study, a framework for engaging in classroom-based inquiry with the sole purpose of improving teaching effectiveness. So, the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning promotes evidence-based teaching. So you have evidence of learning and evidence of your effectiveness so that you can make the right decisions as to how you teach in the classroom. And the ethos of SOTL is that you improve student learning by strengthening teaching practice. So if faculty concentrate on improving their effectiveness in the classroom, that in turn will lead to improved student learning. Okay. SOTL, as I said, it is about higher education faculty who are teaching students, undergraduate students. It asks faculty to bring their research skills that they already have being higher education faculty into their classroom so that they can research their own practice through systematic inquiry. It encourages faculty to be reflective practitioners, think about what it is that they do in the classroom and how they can improve what they do in the classroom, and also puts a lot of emphasis on dissemination, being able to come to events like this one, share best practice, and be able to learn from each other. Some of the research designs that are used in SOTL are action research design, which resembles the whole act of teaching. As teachers, we plan our teaching before we go into the classroom. We implement our plan. We watch how the students are engaging with the activities that we have planned for them. Based on our observations, we then come out of the classroom, reflect on what happened, what worked, what didn't work, and then prepare for our next lesson, having understood what went on and trying to improve what we did the last time. But action research design is not the only research design that we utilize in SOTL projects, in classroom-based inquiries. Probably the most challenging part of designing a SOTL project is choosing the problem or the issue that faculty would like to investigate. Here, when I work with faculty, I ask them to concentrate on something that is meaningful to them, that is possible to research within the time frame that they have, and to make the topic deliberately narrow and focused. The more narrow, specific, and focused the topic is, the more likely that the project, the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning project, will provide the teachers with information they need to improve their teaching practice. There are two kinds of projects that our faculty engage in. One is What Is project. In this project, they design an intervention, but the focus is on talking about the materials that they developed and used in the classroom, and how they integrated those materials within the syllabus or within the curriculum. So the whole focus is on the intervention that they designed, the materials for the intervention, and how they were used in the classroom. The other type of project is to take that one step further, not just this is what I did and this is how I use the materials with my students, but also investigate to what extent the materials help my students learn. So there is an element of measuring impact. We asked also the faculty to consider the time frame. Usually the interventions that they design span a whole semester, but sometimes the interventions can be shorter, can be just a few weeks or just a few lessons long. We also asked them to consider the access to the students that they might have. For example, choose to do something that will allow, they will be allowed or able to do in the classroom with the students that they have. At the SOTL course that that I deliver at the Center for Educational Innovation, I try to do at least 2 groups per campus. We have 2 campuses, one in Dubai, one in Abu Dhabi. And we try to keep the number of participants very low, between 6 and 8, so that we can provide individual attention to their projects. So I will work with faculty to help them design the interventions, help them design the teaching materials that they will be using, help them design the data collection instruments to collect that evidence of learning from the students, and also guide them through the process of ethical clearance application at our university. As a center, we also provide support with literature review, because remember, with SOTL, a key component is dissemination. So we want to support the faculty in publishing the interventions that they do, and after they have researched the impact of their interventions. So we help them with putting together literature review, as I said, helping them design the interventions, the data collection instruments, the teaching materials. Once they have the data, we organize workshops on analyzing the data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. And when the time comes for them to disseminate their results, if they require support with writing an abstract, especially working with faculty whose first language may not be English, we provide help with that as well. And we also help them with writing drafts of their research papers before publication. So the program has been running now for 5 years, and we've had about 130 faculty that have been through the process. We have, last time we checked, which was a few months ago, we had about 91 such projects at different stages of development, and a few publications and conference presentations that came out of it. I mentioned here also that we provide some funding. We run a teaching research innovation fund. So faculty that require some money to purchase materials for their students, these days is usually subscriptions to apps or subscriptions to websites, to help them design their interventions and use those materials with the students to improve their learning. We try to support that. And a lot of the funding also goes to help them to go to conferences and disseminate their findings. Currently, we are supporting 23 different projects happening in progress right now at the university. When we evaluated the program, there was high attendance. People were actually very interested in coming to the sessions. They thought that the length of the course, it's a 10-hour course, was a bit too short. They would have liked more contact. They liked the material that were presented and the fact that we help them build their skill knowledge. A lot of the faculty are not language teachers. They don't have an educational background. So when they come to us, they come with a different research paradigm. So we have to shift their research skills to be more classroom-based and more attuned to working with ESL students in the classroom and designing interventions that will support their ESL students in the classroom. The feedback that we get from the faculty is that they think that research is doable and that they can combine research with teaching. Usually we work with faculty where disciplinary-based research is done outside of the classroom and teaching is just teaching. So when they attend the SOTL course, they find that actually you can combine research with classroom teaching. And not only that, one can actually inform the other. And as I said, when I briefly mentioned the teacher professional development models, this kind of approach to teacher professional development helps the teachers take initiatives within the professional development, direct the professional development to the areas that are most important to them, and discover things about their teaching. Sometimes they were not even aware that they were doing things in the classroom that were not all that helpful for the students, and actively try to improve their teaching and their effectiveness. And as I said, the teaching and the research now inform each other. So you might think, well, this is all good, but what does this have to do with English language teaching or language teaching? Well, the majority of the projects that are I'll just flick through some of the projects that you can see. Those projects, for example, can address vocabulary learning. We have quite a few projects that address collaborative writing and the use of different apps to support the development of academic writing skills in English. Trying different innovative approaches in the English language learning classroom. These particular colleagues actually are English language teachers. As you can see, academic vocabulary features quite often in the projects and interventions that our faculty design, because it is a weakness in our students. Technology, the use of technology is another very popular topic within the projects that the teachers design, especially the use of mobile technology. Some years ago, we received quite a bit of funding to promote the use of mobile technology in teaching and learning, and quite a few of our colleagues took that opportunity to explore that further. As you can see, the use again of mobile learning in the language classroom. Academic writing course, academic writing, academic reading feature quite a bit, because these are two areas that our students are particularly weak. Reading comprehension, as I just mentioned. Assessment these days, especially with since March, we are on online teaching mode. So assessment in an online environment has become quite a bit of a pressing topic. Trying to find ways to assess students within an online teaching and learning context has been a little bit of a challenge for our faculty. Again, mobile learning tools for English language teaching, and again, flipped classroom approach for our students. I also want to mention here that a lot of the projects that our teachers do are related to English language teaching, and we try to get our teachers to publish their findings, their research. We curate a journal that concentrates on teaching and learning in higher education only within the Gulf context, because we want to promote research that's taking place, classroom-based research that's taking place within the Gulf, because we recognize that the Gulf countries are facing a unique context, which I kind of described at the beginning. And therefore, we want to disseminate best practices amongst the community so that we can all learn from each other and improve all at the same time. While the journal, Learning and Teaching Higher Education Gulf Perspectives, is not specific to English language teaching, over the past 16 years that the journal has been in existence, 40% of the papers that have been published are related to second language acquisition and language communication, and how these affect education in the Gulf region. So there is a strong presence of English language teaching and assessment in the journal. Okay, so I will stop here to allow Dr. Al-Shamsi to proceed with her presentation. And I know that there will be time in the end for questions and answers, correct, Dr. Hisham?
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Christina. That was really, really informative. We've got some interesting questions, but like I said, let me pass it on to Dr. Aisha just for the sake of time. And then probably in the last 10 minutes, we can answer some of these questions, but I'm warning you, there are a few interesting questions coming up. So Dr. Aisha, over to you. Dr. Aisha, can you hear us? I think you're on mute.
Okay. I'm trying to share, but I'm disabled. Okay.
Right, now we can see you and we can see the presentation. No, we can't see the presentation though.
No, yeah, because the sharing is disabled.
1 second, Dr. Aisha. I'm trying to sort it.
Yeah, I sent you the presentation anyway, Dr. Hisham. So if you like to share it instead of me sharing it.
Yeah,
does that work, Hisham? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. We've done quite well over the last 5.5 hours with technical issues, but they always come in hand with online events. Oh, excellent. There we are. Thank you, Dr. Hisham.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you, Dr. Christina, for sharing this valuable experience of Zayed University. I'm here also today to discuss my experience with my students' views during this shift to virtual learning environments due to COVID-19 pandemic as well. So my goal was to ensure my students' abilities during this stressful time and willingness to work with their learning environments that we call virtual learning environments of inquiry, to maintain healthy social, cognitive, and teaching presence at the same time. Students and teachers in the UAE are privileged to be equipped with the skills and technologies required to shift to online learning implementation successfully. Instructors and the students also receive extensive PDs like the DigiCampus of the SCT, and the robust infrastructure make it technically easy to change to online learning and face this new reality, challenges, and they use the available opportunities. However, there are still some challenges that emerge from social dimension. This study aims to highlight the results and lessons learned from Emirati female students, in the Faculty of Education and at the SCT in general. Also, the goal is to introduce a new perspective towards the virtual learning environment as a community of inquiry and to provide suggestions and recommendations for future practices. If you go just to the other slide.
I think if you click enable editing, Dr. Hisham, and then go into presentation mode, that should solve it.
I'm moving slides. I'm not sure if you can see them. Can you see the slides? Because
it's the first slide only.
Yeah, I think if you click on enable editing, Dr. Hisham, that should solve it.
Okay.
Enable editing up there. I think I'm able to share mine now.
I gave you, perfect.
Yeah, so it's easy for me to follow up with this. So, okay, in this research or in this presentation, actually, I'll just introduce the literature that informed this study. From a community of inquiry perspective as a framework, and from a bioecological perspective to highlight the existence and the importance of the different aspects and the relationships that affect the students' level of inquiry and the social interaction during a virtual learning environment. Also, I'll introduce the research questions, design, recommendations, and final discussions. Okay. Here, I think during the increasingly demanding circumstances, there was a sense of urgency to create a new emerging role for teachers, as facilitators and mentors during learning environments, and especially during crisis times. Generally, going virtual is not without challenges, despite all privileges in the context of the UAE. We need to consider some social aspects of this phenomenon. For example, during crisis times, the instructor's readiness and social issues affecting the students' learning should be considered as well. I think also the lack of communities of inquiry where students communicate and deal with each other and their instructor, similarly to campus-based communication that ensure positive learning outcomes also should be considered. During such stressful times, instructors need to emphasize the students' social interaction, communication, and engagement at the same time. This will positively affect their problem-solving abilities, critical thinking, higher order thinking skills, And also this will not be possible without good virtual teacher planning and leadership. There is a critical need to create virtual communities, however, with an inquiry focus. We just want to ensure the rigor or the students' abilities to use the acquired information. Teachers also need to ensure virtual learning communities of inquiry with ability to sustain the practice, not just to start it, but to sustain a strong sense of community that support the students socially and cognitively. Based on literature, virtual learning communities lack face-to-face and the social presence, of course. This led to the importance of examining the concept of inquiry presence when conducting virtual learning and the nature of various presence and how they interact with each other and that affect the students' learning. This study is guided by the Community of Inquiry framework. Several studies confirmed its validity, including the 3 dimensions of cognitive, social, and teaching presence. The Community of Inquiry framework outlines learning as, learning explains that learning is located at the intersection of these 3 presence. That is, all the 3 presence, cognitive, social, and teaching, are necessary for learning that should take place during online learning. First, teaching presence is described as the instructor's role and leadership. It's critical because it holds, because it holds the cognitive and the social presence together to ensure, of course, learners' active participation. Teaching presence focuses on the course organization on the blackboard, on Zoom, or whatever. And the design, there should be an easy access for the students to find materials, the design of the tasks and the assessment. There should be direct instruction, such as summaries, presentations, and there should be facilitation of discourse, such as setting the climate and reinforcing the students' contributions during the session. Regarding the social presence, it focuses on developing social interactions and collaboration among the students within a productive virtual social community of inquiry. Actually, Garrison in 2001 categorized social presence into emotional affective expressions where learners share their values and personal expressions. And this is difficult in online and virtual learning. Luckily, my students at that time started their sessions on campus and then moved to a full virtual learning environment. Also, the social dimension highlights the importance of communication. That develops the mutual awareness and recognition aspects. Also, the group cohesion, where they build where the students build and sustain a sense of a group commitment. Regarding the cognitive presence, here we have an issue. It focuses on learners' development of higher order thinking skills, construct meaning, and how they operate through the 4 stages of inquiry. During crisis times and during stressful times, we need to ensure this through communication. Under this type of stress, I don't think students will be able to perform any cognitive task without facilitation, without communication, without group cohesion and commitment. So the first stage is that we practice in my classroom, the triggering, and it's all about highlighting the dilemma that leads to an exploration of the issue, brainstorming. And when students find more information after exploring and brainstorming, ideas are integrated into to construct a meaning of information, and this will lead to a resolution. Actually, this was practiced during the practicum course with Year 1 students. Because there are social and other aspects that affect the students' learning, I included or considered the bioecological perspective, because there is an increasing recognition of the difficulties students and their families experience during educational transitions. As the transition to a new virtual learning environment. And especially with large families that we have here in the UAE, despite the spacious houses where students can have their learning independently, we still have some issues. Some of these difficulties are linked to the stress related to adjusting to the new setting, classrooms, teachers, and the new expectations. Okay. Also, I think joining a new groups, having a new system, and the level of independence we expect from the students. Also, the relationships between the students and their colleagues, the relationship between students and their teachers, families, and so on. The effect of the different systems, such as family and their partnerships with the higher education or schools in general. Also, within the increase, the interacting systems, relationships are formed due to sustained interpersonal interactions. And this is what we, or what I wanted to ensure while having our online sessions. These relationships are bidirectional, by which ecology changes the individual and the individual affect the ecology as well. So productive learning environments require productive relationships to achieve expected positive learning results. Personally, I believe in well-designed learning without learning relationship will fail or will not achieve its targeted objective. The most important thing is the active interaction between the individual and the ecology to create successful learning experiences. When I refer to bioecological perspective, I refer to the process that is considered as a bidirectional relationships between individuals, not just the students between themselves, but the students and their teachers, as well as their parents, and the ecology in general. These relationships include learners and their peers, as I mentioned, and the other individuals affecting their learning. Positive interactions are influential in determining the individual's development and positive results. We need to ensure these positive results with positive relationships. When we talk about person, or when we refer to the concept of person, it's all about the required characteristics of the individuals, students, parents, and teachers, including, and here I focus on the students, not just the genetic or the physical or the psychological or the behavioral development of learning. Here I want just to integrate this type of readiness that they have in their own personalities and qualities, and integrate it with the social dimension. In other words, the quality of the learning experience can be determined by the person's influences, such as their, gender, as we have here, female students, self-esteem, self-confidence, social skills, independence, support from home, and their needs. We have students with special needs in our classes. When I refer to the context of the individual, it includes the interacting system of the social characteristics surrounding them, such as the school structures, the campus, the learning environment, and the disciplinary procedures, and etc. And the final thing about the bioecological perspective, the time element, represented in this research, as the current work or my research recognizes the educational transition as a critical time in students and their families' lives. Okay, for the bioecological perspective of learning, it requires the focus on context of learning in order to determine the positive learning outcomes. The desired learning experiences will happen through, or will occur through the bidirectional interactions between the individuals and their wider system surrounding them. Okay, and I think having both a community of inquiry framework supported by the bioecological perspective, I believe that many interacting influences such as social, teaching, and design and cognitive affect the students' learning as presented in the community of framework will affect each other, interact, and finally will improve students' learning. When each aspect of each system dimension positively interact and support each other, the learner can better have or experience his or her learning. So based on the bioecological perspective and guided by the community of inquiry framework, having online materials in the new learning environment or just design them on the blackboard is not enough. I didn't find this as sufficient element for student success. Instead, instructors must contextualize these materials to adjust their teaching and learning experiences to the new reality with full support they receive from the home and outside context that affect the students' learning, such as the cultural values and the camera issues that will be discussed later. Okay, beside the teaching methodologies, strategies, and virtual learning environment that drive students' engagement to support, we need to consider as well the assessment feedback strategies. We need also, when I consider the bioecological perspective of teaching and learning in virtual learning environment, I focus on the tools as well as the context of teaching and learning, using the new interactive technological tools to just interact and students. Regarding the community of inquiry, these tools are represented in different strategies that are required to successfully getting each presence affect the students' teaching and learning experiences. The most common feature in virtual learning environments is the combination of personal relationships to the learner and to the instructor and the learner and the other learners as well. And we need, generally, we need just to get the best out of these virtual learning environments and to ensure the cognitive outcomes and the rigor learning while achieving our expectations. This study used a qualitative research with a phenomenology design to describe the lived experiences and to explore and articulate students' deep meaning. This study reflected female Emirati college students lived the experience during the recent virtual learning environment that emerged as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This research is critical. This research's critical nature is situated in the effect of the sudden shift to the virtual learning environments. These are the three main, I use the open-ended questionnaires, I use the interviews, I use the classroom observations to answer these three main questions. For the first question, I use the interviews. How do cognitive, social, and teaching presence influence Emirati female students' perceptions during the sudden shift? Also, the second question, what do Emirati female college students consider as a challenge? I use the both interviews and the open-ended questionnaire. And finally, regarding the relationships that exist among cognitive, social, and teaching presence, the open-ended questionnaire integrated with the classroom observations and interviews. To answer the first question, of course, the data analysis, because it is a qualitative research, was completed using the NVivo software. To answer the first question about the students' perceptions and the challenges for the second question as well, major themes emerged under the teaching presence. For example, let me move to this slide. For example, for the teaching perception, about their teaching perception, major theme emerged, like the design and organization of the courses. Students noticed that there were modifications on the virtual, lessons designed, integrated in the Blackboard, and when changed to the learning environment, the syllabus changed and the design of activities, content is totally organized in a different way in the Blackboard. Also, teachers effectively use the online platform. Everything was there for the students in an organized folders. Teachers also use group-based teaching. Students like the group-based teaching, and the facilitation they received from their teachers, like kept the students focused. Actually, some students highlighted the unnecessary repetitions by teachers, because it is an online learning and teachers had to repeat certain instructions. Also, this all encouraged participation by the teachers, increased the use of engagement activities, like, a balance between talking and giving the task. The good thing they reported is about the class giving a task or tasks, or giving more chance for students to do their own learning after raising certain dilemma question, providing certain steps for the inquiry, and getting students work into groups. Okay, also they liked the direct and clear and explicit instruction, and this was followed by the timely feedback. Actually, we use different means to provide feedback, not just the Blackboard or the emails, but also we use the social media. Here, when we talk about the social presence that the students reported, the major themes here, like the modes of affective expressions, like the students at that time needed to know each other. The privilege was they knew each other before moving to the online learning, and this helped them support each other. Also, they joined different groups, they joined different students, they created this sense of commitment that they need to support each other, doesn't matter her friend or not. I'll just move to the third aspect, which is the cognitive aspect here, the encouragement of a problem solving, exploration, integration, and resolution. The challenges, here are the challenges. I don't think I have time to present all of the challenges, but actually mainly I'll talk about the family issues and the restriction and the problems of using cameras, and also the issues that the students faced during their support of their brothers and sisters and siblings. There are certain problems, as I mentioned, and that should be tackled by the support between the Ministry of Education, higher colleges of technology, and getting parents on board. The students provided some suggestions related to the use of camera. There should the policy is there, but we need to get parents on board. We need also to ensure the utilization of technologies at home, and also the support they get from family, and the harder connection or the stronger connection. I wish I had more time to explain more details about this very interesting research related to students' own experiences from a phenomenological perspective. Thank you very much for listening, and let's start our question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aisha. This was really interesting. We have around 6 minutes left, so I'll try to summarize some of the questions that were asked. Let me start, first of all, with a question to Christina. Christina, the question that basically we have in front of us is related to teachers of subjects, teaching of other subjects using English as a medium of instruction. And I think this is a very interesting question in everybody's head. How can we create that balance between the content and language, and the use of the language in that, for that matter? I think this is really an interesting topic. So in a few minutes, if you can shed some light on that. Dr. Christina, over to you.
So yes, if you're an English language teacher, then you know what strategies to use, because we have a whole field dedicated to that, content and language integrated learning, CLIL. But if you are a faculty member who does not have English language teaching training or any education training, you're an expert, let's say, in engineering, but you've never been trained on how to teach engineering, let alone how to teach engineering to second language learners. In that case, when we work with the faculty, we need to give them a background in educational theories and learning. Basically, how do students learn, to make them more aware of the strategies that they're using in the classroom to teach our students, and then more specific strategies to support the students with language. For example, if they do have challenging academic readings that they do with the students, then we encourage them to use tried and proven strategies, such as provide students with the keywords beforehand, go over the keywords to make sure that the students understand them, create graphic organizers for the readings to guide the students through the readings, help the students or motivate the students to do what we would call jigsaw reading activities. So divide an academic reading to several sections, and then allow the students to work as a group, and each person in the group read a section of the reading, and then bring them together to actually reconstruct the reading from the perspective of the section that they read. So the burden of having to go through a challenging academic reading is distributed among different members in the group. And now we're also putting on an added layer in this training because they have to do all that online. So how do you do that in a Zoom session? By using the breakout rooms. So we actually did training of our faculty on what we call active learning strategies. And surprise, surprise, out of, I think we had a set of 20 active learning strategies to use with a Zoom session. I would say at least 15 of those were strategies that we use in a regular English language lesson. So in effect, we are drawing from our experience as English language teachers to help our faculty support our learners in an online language environment, in an online teaching and learning environment. I hope that answers the question a bit, yeah?
It does indeed, and I'm sure there would be further follow-ups directly sent to you. Dr. Aisha, just a quick question. In your presentation, you touched on the relationship between the regulator, the family, families and the educators. So how important, in your view, is this relationship really? And how can we basically transform the perception, particularly in certain communities, towards effective use of learning tools in a classroom?
Well, the relationship between families and schools, or even the higher education, is very important and highlighted in the literature. And we as educators always seek the support of families. Without the support of family, I don't think we will be able to achieve our goals and targeted learning outcomes. Once we design something for our students to be completed, and we require, for example, the use of the camera or the breakout groups, or even we require at least strong connection. In the UAE, the family member. A lot of family members live in one home. We have extended families and use the same router or the same modem, or sometimes they get disconnected and they just leave the session. And this is an issue actually for the students. Again, whatever strategy we implement without the support of the family cannot be completed, while our female college students are pulled to support other siblings during their own sessions. So having parents on board, explaining the policy for them, especially for the higher education, is very important during these times.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I think that really brings us to the end of the presentation. I mean, it's a bit of a shame that basically we're running out of time. We have a lot of questions, but that leaves me with only enough time to thank both of you for your valuable presentations. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much, and back to you, George.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hisham. Thank you, Dr. Aisha.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We have one more talk left in the AM session, so hopefully you can see on screen now. We have one more talk from Simon Borg, but if you haven't registered already for the roundtable sessions, which are starting in an hour, please use this link. I will put it in the chat box, and I will now hand over to my colleague, Elaine Blaus. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, George. Hello, everybody. I'm Elaine Blaus. I'm the Director of Europe, Middle East and Africa at Cambridge Assessment English. And I joined Cambridge English as Director of Spain and Portugal in 2014, and then became Deputy Director of the Global Network in 2016. But thank you for everyone's contributions so far. And I'm sure you'll all agree this is a really fantastic and worthwhile event. Well, this year has been like no other when you consider the restrictions that we've all faced. But one theme that is emerging, not just from today, but in our wider work too, is how the pandemic has accelerated the need for new technology-driven solutions for learning and assessment. And research plays a key role in helping us to find these solutions, which is why events like today are so vital to our ongoing work. And if we look at the teaching community, for example, almost overnight, many teachers had to switch to the online environment and find new ways of teaching English. And that's something we were able to support at Cambridge through our events, our webinars, online courses, and other support materials. In fact, we held an event back in September with Cambridge University Press with expert-led sessions to support the English language teaching community through these uncertain times. The participation was staggering, with viewing figures of more than 370,000 people. And on the subject of teaching community, it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Simon Borg. Professor Borg has been involved in education for over 30 years, and he's worked as a teacher, a teacher educator, a lecturer, and a researcher covering a range of contexts. He now works as an education consultant and has published widely on the subject of teacher development. Today, he's going to talk about some research that he's carried out in this area and look at the challenges of designing and implementing professional development for teachers that results in positive and lasting educational change. So now I'll hand over to Professor Borg.
Thank you very much, Elaine, for that introduction. I'll just get my screen shared here. Okay, I trust you can see my presentation. Is that right? Elaine, can you just confirm that? You can see the actual PowerPoint.
I can see the PowerPoints. It's just not in presentation mode, but yes,
okay,
I can see it.
Right. Let me try that again. No, that's not right. Okay, let's try this again. How about this time?
Oh, perfect.
Okay, great. Great. Well, thanks again for the introduction. Thank you to Cambridge for organising this great event and for inviting me to contribute. And thanks to everyone who's joined us today from around the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about professional development for educational change, and it's a broad view of this theme, which draws on two aspects of my background. One, my background as a researcher in the field of professional development, and I've been doing this kind of work for some time now in a range of international contexts, typically with a focus on professional development, and specializing largely on English language education, although some of the work has involved teachers of other subjects. And the second aspect of my background that I'll be drawing on is my work as a consultant, which focuses on designing, implementing, and evaluating professional development programs for teachers around the world. And I'd just like to draw on those two strands of experience to share some insights about the kinds of approaches to professional development which are more likely to lead to lasting changes in the work of teachers and students, and also to highlight some of the reasons why professional development initiatives fall short of their intended targets. And hopefully this material will be useful for anyone in the audience who's involved in researching professional development, and for those among you who are responsible for setting up, implementing, and evaluating professional development programs. I'm particularly interested in professional development at a systemic level. In other words, professional development at scale, at national level, state level, district level, although many of the points I make are equally relevant to smaller scale initiatives at the level, for example, of institutions. So to start with some obvious points, I think, that we're all very familiar with by this stage. The importance of teachers and teacher competence to educational achievement has been repeated many times in recent years, as we can see in this quote here. We're reminded that teachers are the most important school level factor in student achievement, and that teachers are key to improving education outcomes. One result of the general acceptance of this point is that globally now professional development is widely recognized as a key mechanism in systemic attempts to enhance teacher competence and hence, of course, student learning outcomes. Student learning outcomes are the ultimate purpose of professional development, so we mustn't obviously forget those. So professional development is now recognized worldwide as a key mechanism in attempts to improve teacher competence, which in turn are believed to lead to student improvements in student learning outcomes. And as I said earlier, I've been I've been involved in a number of projects around the world in recent years, all of which share this common desire to improve teacher competence and hence to improve the quality of education that students receive. The typical pattern or flowchart that educational organizations follow when they're trying to improve learning outcomes is something like the diagram you can see now. It starts at the bottom with some dissatisfaction with the status quo, dissatisfaction with learning outcomes, very often triggered by unfavorable results in international league tables or similar comparisons. The response to that dissatisfaction is to say, we need to improve the quality of the teachers, and the strategy for doing that is some form of professional development initiative. As I said, the expectation is that will lead to improvements in teacher competence, which will in turn lead to instructional change, so positive changes in what teachers do in the classroom, and ultimately to improved learning outcomes. That's a fairly standard sort of flow chart for the sort of model of thinking that is followed. What very often happens, of course, is that we hit a bit of a brick wall at the transition point between the delivery of the professional development and change in the classroom. So it is not uncommon to see professional development programs designed, implemented, teachers take part. They do benefit from the programs, they do improve their knowledge, they do acquire new skills, new awarenesses. However, evidence of those new skills and competences be carried forward into the classroom are very often limited, and with the consequence that the desired improvements in learning outcomes don't materialize either. And so a lot of the work I've done is investigating why this happens, and as I said, some of the insights I'll share today will help us understand some of the factors which lead to these kinds of barriers, and some strategies we can use in designing professional development initiatives to overcome them. So there are a number of key considerations I'd like to run through with you today. These are points which I think we need to keep in mind and explicitly articulate our position on when we are in the process of designing professional development initiatives. So if you're responsible for setting up professional development in your institution or systemically at the national level, district level, state level, one of your immediate tasks is to sit down and to try to articulate your position, the position of your team, of your organization in relation to these issues. And as I'll explain, doing so puts you in a much stronger position to deliver professional development that makes a difference. So let's start with a quick look at the issue of models of professional development. These are widely discussed in the literature. Two contrasting models we can highlight briefly are labeled in different ways, but we'll call them a transmission model on one hand and a constructivist model on the other. A transmission model of professional development has a number of distinctive characteristics. It's a focus on received knowledge, in other words, on conveying to teachers knowledge derived from external theory, from external research. Input is seen as the primary means of teacher learning. In other words, teachers will learn in this model by receiving input from a trainer or a more authoritative external provider. The view of teachers is somewhat deficit-oriented. In other words, the assumption is that there are gaps in teacher competence which need to be plugged or filled. There's very often an assumption that teachers come to training or professional development as empty vessels. And in terms of the relationship between theory and practice, this model assumes a clear link from theory to practice. The professional development will provide the theory, teachers will then implement it in practice, and the assumed result is improved teaching and learning. An alternative model of professional development, as I said, is labeled constructivist. This has different characteristics, as we can see here. Without negating the value and the importance of received knowledge, constructivist approaches to professional development also emphasize the importance of experiential knowledge, the knowledge that teachers developed developed through experience of being teachers in the classroom, and that's valued as an important source of teacher expertise. In terms of processes for teacher learning, dialogue and inquiry are emphasized. Again, we're not negating the role of input in this model, but there's a great emphasis on the importance of dialogue, of teachers talking to one another and to trainers and other people who support them, and inquiry, particularly inquiry in the classroom. There's also a great emphasis on the prior knowledge that teachers bring to the process, in contrast to the view of them as empty vessels. Within a constructivist model, the view is that teachers have expertise, have prior knowledge, which needs to be valued and used as a resource in the process of supporting their professional development. And finally, in terms of theory, there's a great emphasis on practical theory. So rather than a theory to practice model, there's a more dynamic relationship between the two. So we hear about theorizing practice, for example. We hear about evaluating theory in the light of practice. So these are two contrasting models. Of course, for the purposes of this analysis, I'm presenting them in a rather black and white manner. In practice, models will, in practice, professional development programs do very often combine elements of both. But the important point for us when we are designing professional development initiatives is to be explicit about the particular model that we are adopting. Very often models are adopted tacitly. In other words, they're adopted without any explicit articulation of them and of why. And then they exert a hidden influence on the professional development initiative and everything that happens through that. So I think it's very important for us to be explicit about the models we're adopting when we set out to provide professional development, and to think about the implications of the choices we make. Now, if we look at the literature, clearly, constructivist models are supported in the literature today. There's a lot of support for these models. However, based on my work around the world, I think I need to encourage you to be critical in the way you look at constructivist models and the way you try to implement them. And there are a number of reasons why we need to be critical. First of all, a lot of the evidence and the theorizing around constructivism comes from particular context, such as North America, for example, has been an important source of insight. However, limited evidence about the use and value of constructivist models exists, A, in relation to specific disciplines, and B, in relation to specific contexts. So we do need to be critical in taking models that have been developed in particular contexts and applying them to contexts which may be very different. Another point to keep in mind, that the context for professional development, for teacher professional development around the world, are extremely diverse. And that means, I'll show you a quote to make this point briefly, that no single model is likely to be equally effective in all different professional development contexts. And the importance of contextualizing our approach to professional development is one I'll continue to make throughout this talk. Another point to keep in mind, of course, is that trendiness does not guarantee results. Constructivism may be the trend at the moment, but we just need to remember that trendiness does not guarantee results. And we can say this for many other aspects of education. Another point is that the conditions that are necessary for constructivist models of professional development to work are very often lacking in particular contexts. So, for example, we might say we're going to adopt a mentoring approach to professional development. Now, mentoring is a constructivist model. It emphasizes dialogue between teachers. It emphasizes situated learning in schools and classrooms. However, for mentoring to work effectively, a number of conditions need to be in place. There needs to be a culture of openness in schools, so teachers are comfortable visiting each other's classrooms. There needs to be a culture where feedback is accepted. The mentors need to have the skills to provide constructive feedback in order not to damage the morale or esteem of the teachers they work with. Schools need to provide the conditions which facilitate the work of mentors and their mentees. And these kinds of conditions very often not in place, and where that is the case, trying to apply a mentoring approach to professional development, for example, won't work. So again, before we run with a constructivist model, despite the fact that it's the one that is favored in the contemporary literature, we need to make sure the right conditions are in place. The final warning is that there is often a big difference between planned and enacted professional development. And in my work as an evaluator, I do very often come across projects which on paper look very strong, are theoretically very well grounded, but which in practice don't reflect the plan. So here we have a distinction between the planned professional development and enacted professional development. A program I worked on recently, for example, in the plan, emphasized the role of action research in the professional development of teachers. And again, that's an issue that is in line with constructivist thinking. However, when I evaluated what was happening in practice with the teachers in their schools, there was actually very little evidence that action research was being carried out. So again, we need to be very careful about running with constructivist models unless we can be sure that the conditions to support them exist. So overall, then, the first point I'm making, that an important consideration when we're designing professional development models is to be explicit, professional development initiatives, sorry, is to be explicit about the model of professional development that's going to underpin our work, and to think through the implications of that model, and of course to make sure that the conditions in our particular context are supportive of that model. So a couple of quotes quickly just to build on the points I've made so far. This one says simply, it's simplistic to argue that constructivist approaches will necessarily produce superior results to more conventional workshop-based in-service programs. Theoretically, yes, constructivism, is better than conventional training workshops, but we need to look at these issues in context, and without reference to the context, it is simplistic to argue that constructivism will always be the best approach. And as I said earlier, this quote, it seems particularly unlikely that any one standard design of professional development would be appropriate or indeed practical in all contexts. So again, the importance of contextualizing the decisions we make about how to implement professional development in particular contexts. Okay, moving on to my second consideration. This is teacher autonomy, and the question we need to ask ourselves here when we're setting up professional development initiatives is this one, or rather there are two questions here. How important is it to give teachers autonomy for their professional development? And what impact does this have on professional development outcomes? In other words, does giving teachers more autonomy make the professional development more effective, for example? So a few reflections on this issue. First of all, we've got the issue of self-determination. The argument here is that teachers will benefit from professional development more if they engage in it because they want to. The idea that voluntary participation is likely to be more effective than participation in professional development that is compelled. And of course, it's an intuitive argument. It does make a lot of sense. I worked on a program recently where participation was voluntary. It was a smaller scale program with about 200 teachers. And the program was successful, and one of the explanations that was provided for its success was the fact that the teachers on it had opted to do so. So clearly there are good arguments here that support self-determination in professional development. However, looking at the kind of work I do around the world, on most systemic programs I've worked, teacher participation is typically mandatory. In other words, teachers are nominated by their employer, by their ministry, and told that they will join a program. And this is at odds with ideas about self-determination, but there are also arguments that support this approach. For example, if we're thinking systemically and we want to achieve educational change on a large scale, then maximizing teacher enrollment is likely to improve impact. In other words, if a ministry wishes to promote educational change across the country and makes participation optional, and as a result, the number of teachers who participate is low, then of course that's going to hinder the ministry's attempt to bring about educational change. So in order to bring about educational change at scale, it is necessary to compel teachers to participate in programs. So what we have then here is a situation where we somehow need to find a balance between the benefits of self-determination and the more practical needs of maximizing teacher participation. And a concept such as controlled autonomy is perhaps a useful one to work with in those contexts. What control autonomy means is that there are centrally controlled and standardized parameters for professional development, which are non-negotiable. But within that overall framework, there are spaces, there are possibilities for teachers to make certain decisions. And I think it's that kind of balance overall that works best when we're talking about systemic professional development programs. And so the question for us, for those of us who are involved in designing professional development programs, particularly at scale, is how can we balance the benefits of self-determination with the needs to maximize teacher participation in programs. Teacher motivation is a third issue, which I think is particularly interesting and also has some bearing on what I've said about teacher autonomy. In some of the programs I've worked on, I've witnessed a pattern which follows these steps or stages. So you have mandatory professional development programs where teachers are compelled to participate. The immediate reaction by many teachers is resistance. They are not too excited by the prospect of being compelled to take part in professional development, particularly when programs extend over several months or a year or more. However, what I have seen on certain programs is that when the program is well designed and teachers start to recognize the value of the work they're doing, so the value of the professional development program for them, for their schools, for their learners, as this recognition starts to impinge on teachers, what we see is that motivation to participate increases, and this leads to committed engagement. So what we have here is within the context of a mandatory program where teachers may have very little autonomy. Nonetheless, if we can increase motivation, the teachers are more likely to participate in a committed and engaged way. So if we're thinking about the relative weight, as you can see at this diagram here, the relative weight of motivation and autonomy in improving the effectiveness of professional development outcomes, I would tend to side with motivation based on what I've seen around the world. In other words, it's more important to motivate teachers to participate in professional development than it is to give them autonomy. Of course, ideally, we can address both, but very often that's not feasible. In other words, even in professional development programs where teachers have little autonomy in terms of what they study, how they study, and whether they actually join or not, even in those contexts where teachers have very few choices, if the program is seen to be of value to them and to their learners, they are likely to participate in a committed way and therefore to benefit from the program. Motivation, therefore, is very important in getting teachers to participate and to benefit from professional development programs, and therefore a very important question for us when we're designing programs and for organizations who are designing professional development programs, particularly at scale, but also within institutions, is to think about how teacher motivation to participate can be increased. So what can we do in practical terms to increase the motivation of teachers to take part in our programs? Motivation is also important at the stage of professional development when teachers need to apply in the classroom what they're learning from their professional development. And we've got a quote here from the World Bank which says that no amount of training or inputs can substitute for teacher motivation. This is a very important point for us to keep in mind. Teachers can take part in professional development, they can acquire new skills and strategies, but the extent to which they actually take them back to the classroom or implement them in the classroom is going to depend very much on how motivated they are to do so. So again, the question arises, how can we increase teachers' motivation, not only to take part in professional development, but to apply what they learn in their classrooms? And a lot of this motivation needs to come not just from not just at the level of ministries, but very often at the level of the schools teachers work in. So school leaders have an important role to play here. Okay, I assume everything's okay technically, that you can still see me and hear me, and that if that's not the case, someone will give me a shout at some point. But hopefully,
it's fine, Simon. Thank you. We can
hear you,
see clearly. It's
great. Thank you. Thanks for confirming. Okay. Okay. Another very important consideration, I think, when we're designing professional development initiatives, is to think about the objectives of the program, and it's important to do this because teacher competence, as you see on this quote, teacher competence is multidimensional. There are many different aspects to teacher competence, and therefore professional development programs need to be explicit about which aspects of teacher competence are being targeted. And just to give you a flavor of the possibilities here, we don't need to go through all of this in detail, but along the top there, in the colored boxes, you can see different dimensions of teacher competence. So there's aspects of teacher knowledge. We've got the second box is the actual teaching skills, which is broken down into planning and instructional skills. And instructional skills in turn can be broken down into many different elements. There's the affective side of teacher competence, motivation, competence, beliefs, identity. There are aspects of teacher competence related to inquiry, so developing in teachers skills to reflect, skills to do research. And another dimension of teacher competence is the interpersonal dimension, improving their ability to communicate, to collaborate, and to lead others. And this is by no means a comprehensive breakdown of the different elements and sub-elements of teacher competence. So it is really important when we're designing professional development programs to be explicit about which aspects of teacher competence we are targeting. No program is going to be able to target all of these. And without some clear sense of which are being targeted, there is a danger that then content and materials may be unfocused. Without a clear sense of objectives as well, evaluating professional development programs, as I'll explain later, does become quite difficult. So another important piece of advice for anyone involved in setting up professional development programs is to be very clear about the aspects of teacher competence that the program is targeting. Also important, moving on from objectives, is to think about the nature of the content and materials that are going to be used on a professional development program. And again, we've got two options here, even though in practice programs will very often blend elements of both. But for the purposes of analysis, we can think about content and materials that are more centralized. In other words, they will be standardized, the same content and materials for all teachers on the program. They will be predefined, so all the materials will be produced in advance, and maybe at the start of the program, they can be presented in the form of a handbook. The materials will very often be commissioned and externally written to certain specifications, and the content of the material will very often be global. So the materials might be about effective practice in teaching and learning foreign languages, or effective practice in teaching and learning science or mathematics globally, rather than looking specifically at a particular context. In contrast, we might have an approach to content and materials which is more decentralized, where materials can vary for individual groups or perhaps even teachers. Materials and content are developed in an emergent way. They're developed as the program unfolds. They are written internally, very often with contributions by participants, by trainers and teachers themselves. And the materials have a very local focus. They're very closely linked or aligned to the curricula teachers work with, for example, to what teachers are doing in the classroom. And again, as I said, many programs will blend elements of these. Some of the programs I've worked on recently, for example, start with a standardized package of content. But as the program unfolds and participants gain confidence, they are encouraged to contribute their own materials, to develop more locally focused materials that respond to immediate needs that teachers have in their classroom. So it is possible to combine those. And this is an approach that can work quite well. But again, going back to the general point I'm making today, is that if you are responsible for setting up and designing professional development programs, it is extremely important for you to be explicit about the approach to content and materials that's going to be adopted on your program, and to think about the implications of that. One obvious implication, for example, is budgetary. If you want standardized, predefined, commissioned materials that are being written to high specifications, there is a cost attached to that. On the other hand, if you're asking local trainers to develop materials in an ongoing manner as part of their work, that can be less costly. So that is just one example of an implication that decisions about the role of content and materials can have for the program. And while we are talking about theoretical issues, of course, we mustn't forget that practical issues such as budgetary resources will always impinge in a significant way on the kinds of decisions that are made when professional development is being designed and implemented. Okay, just a few more points to keep in mind. One is teacher-educator competence. We can't ignore the significant impact on professional development outcomes that the quality of teacher educators has. I'm calling them teacher educators here. That's simply the person who's responsible for facilitating or delivering a professional development program. They may have other names depending on the programs. Sometimes they're mentors, sometimes they're coordinators, sometimes they're facilitated, sometimes they're trainers. But the general point is that the competence of these individuals has a very significant effect on the quality of professional development programs. In the same way that the quality of teachers has a very significant impact on the quality of learning outcomes. And very often I work on programs where the centrality of teacher educators isn't sufficiently well recognized, and not enough thought has gone into the profile of teacher educators and the implications of teacher educators for program outlines. So it is very important when we're designing programs to think about the kinds of criteria that teacher educators need to meet, the kinds of preparation that they're going to need for their role, the kinds of ongoing support they're going to require during the job, and also importantly, how the effectiveness of their work as teacher educators is going to be evaluated. So in terms of ongoing support, for example, a recent program I worked on required at quite short notice due to COVID to move from face-to-face workshops to online webinar delivery. And for many teacher educators, this was a new experience, and they needed immediate support from the program organizers to prepare them for that role. And because that support wasn't immediately available, some of the teacher educators did find the transition from face-to-face workshops to webinars challenging, and that inevitably will have impinged on the quality of the professional development program. So it is very important for us when we're designing programs not to forget about the role of teacher educators, not to assume that they have the competence to do the work effectively, and that they will be self-sufficient in addressing any challenges that arise. I don't think that's a very wise policy. We need to be proactive in thinking about their needs and how we can not only support them but also monitor the quality of their work. The second last issue is to do with the distribution of time and activity. This is a very important consideration in the design of professional development initiatives. The kinds of questions I get asked very often, is it best to give the teachers an intensive week of training, for example, 40 hours, 8 hours a day for 5 days, or is it better to distribute that over, I don't know, over 5 weeks, over 3 months, over 6 months? And given the option, I'd always go for the distributed approach, as I'll explain, although very often there are practical reasons why that's not feasible. But as an ideal approach to the distribution of time and activity, I would always encourage individuals responsible for professional development to ensure that these three elements are part of the program. In other words, that teachers have opportunities to receive input, both from external sources and from other teachers, that they have opportunities for inquiry, particularly inquiry in the classroom, and they have opportunities to reflect on the outcomes of the inquiry, both in terms of the effectiveness of the teaching, the new teaching that they're trying out, the new ideas they're trying out, and its impact on learners. I would also recommend that these processes unfold collaboratively through interaction and dialogue among teachers. There's plenty of evidence in the literature that when teachers learn together, they learn more effectively. And as I've already said, I would always encourage professional development initiatives to make sure that these processes can unfold over time. There are possibilities, of course, in which intensive professional development work is combined with more extended work, and those models can work well too. A recent program I worked on, for example, involved intensive 1-week workshops 3 or 4 times a year, and in between those workshops, teachers were involved in completing reflective assignments in their classrooms, and they continued to interact with their teacher educators and with one another online during that period. And those kinds of models can work quite well. But I think if we keep in mind the importance of the elements noted on this diagram here, I think we've got a greater chance of ensuring that the professional development does lead to meaning outcomes. So input, inquiry, reflection, collaboration, and over time. And of course, we could add to that with appropriate support from teacher educators, mentors, and facilitators of some kind, and including support from schools. The final point I'd like to comment on briefly is the importance of evaluating professional development. This is central to much of the work I do. As I said, as a consultant, a lot of my work involves evaluating systemic professional development initiatives around the world. And when we are evaluating professional development, our concern is impact. We're looking for evidence of impact. And by impact, as you can see here, what I mean is observed or observable, positive and sustained change in teacher competence, leading to improvements in students' educational experience. So that's what we're looking for when we're evaluating professional development programs. Sometimes professional development programs in their evaluations focus on other issues. For example, they focus on how satisfied teachers are with the program. They ask teachers how much they enjoyed the program. They look at issues like how many teachers participated in the program, how many learners were potentially affected by the program. These are interesting metrics. But they are not sufficient measures of impact. If we're interested in measuring impact, we do need to be looking at, as I said here, sustained change, not only in teacher competence, but also in teaching and learning in classrooms. And there are a number of important, I think, elements that need to be part of the way we evaluate professional development programs in order to make the evaluation effective. Evaluation needs to be driven by the objectives of the program. As I said earlier, it's extremely important to specify early on what specific aspects of teacher competence and perhaps indeed learner competence are being targeted by a program. These can then become the focus of subsequent evaluation. It's important for the evaluation of professional development to be multi-stage, in other words, not one shot, only at the end of the program, but ideally with some kind of baseline for longer programs, some kind of midterm evaluation, an exit evaluation, and ideally, although in my experience this rarely happens, further evaluation 3 to 6 months, maybe after the end of a program, to see what the sustained impact has been. The evaluation of professional development needs to be rigorous. In other words, it needs to be technically sound. This applies to the selection of research instruments, the design of instruments, the collection and the analysis of data. This all needs to be done rigorously, and very often organizations will need some support to build capacity in order to carry out such tasks. Of course, many organizations engage external consultants to support them with evaluations, and as I said, that's the kind of work I very often do. Evaluations of professional development ideally will be formative. In other words, the results will feed back into subsequent improvements into a program. And finally, the approach we take to evaluating professional development needs to be feasible. This is critical. There's no point in developing a highly sophisticated evaluation framework which can't be implemented due to limitations in human resources, budgets, and other logistical barriers. Okay, so to conclude then, what I've talked about today are ways in which we can improve the design, particularly of systemic professional development. But as I said, the points I've made, I think, are equally relevant to the design and implementation of professional development on a smaller scale, for example, within an institution. The points I've made, it is very important for those responsible for designing professional development to be aware of a number of key parameters, which I've talked about today, and the implications those parameters have for the design and the implementation and indeed the outcomes of professional development programs. It's extremely important that professional development programs have clear objectives in relation to teacher competence and learner competence. It is important for the design of professional development to have a strong theoretical underpinning. There's a huge literature available on professional development. There are many reviews are available about what makes professional development effective. There are many extensive discussions of theories such as social cultural theories and constructivist approaches to teacher learning. And it is important that the design of professional development be informed to some extent by an awareness of these. However, it's equally important that theoretical ideals are balanced against contextual considerations. And in fact, the design of effective professional development can be thought of as an attempt to reconcile theoretical considerations with contextual needs. Ultimately, if a program is not contextually appropriate, if it's not fit for purpose in a particular context, a sophisticated theoretical background is not going to be particularly helpful. So ultimately, we need to make sure that the program works in the context for which it's being designed. And that very often means that theoretical considerations do need to be mediated to some extent. Feasibility, as I've emphasized, is extremely important. We do need to be feasible in the way we design programs. We need to take into consideration the resources available, logistics, budgets, and the kinds of demands that can be reasonably made upon teacher educators, teachers, and schools. And finally, the importance of robust evaluation cannot be overemphasized. Without robust evaluations, we can't really make informed decisions about how effective a professional development program is and how we might improve it. There is a chapter coming out hopefully early next year. You can see the details here, which this presentation draws on, and which hopefully you'll be able to get your hands on if you'd like to know more about these issues. And you can see there's my email address if you'd like to contact me with any questions about anything I've said, or about professional initiatives you're working on. My website is there too. That includes a blog where I write about professional development. And if you're on Twitter and like to follow me, my handle is also there. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Elaine now.
Thank you so much, Professor Borg. That was fascinating, really, and really, I mean, just to echo what you've said, while it is widely accepted that teacher quality is the most significant school level influence on student outcomes, and that's something I think that resonates with all of us. It's interesting to hear about the challenges that persist in designing and implementing professional development. So that was really great. There are a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Taking those. So the first one is there any evidence that teachers who choose their own professional development autonomously, as you talked to us about, that they have a greater tendency to take their learning into the classroom later?
I wouldn't say there's a solid body of research evidence that confirms that, although intuitively, as I think I said in the talk, it does make sense that when teachers choose of their own volition to commit time and energy and resources to professional development, they're more invested in the process. And as a result of that investment, they're more likely to take what they've learned and to try to apply it in their context. Now, there can be reasons why that doesn't happen, of course, because there can be barriers at school level, for example, which limit teachers' ability to transfer into the classroom new strategies and ideas that they're acquiring during training. And that's why it's really important that there is alignment between what professional development is trying to achieve and what schools are trying to achieve. And sometimes that alignment is not there, and teachers end up in the rather frustrating situation of wanting to change what happens in schools, but finding that the conditions that allow them to do so don't exist. So while intuitively I'd say definitely yes, when teachers volunteer for programs, they're more likely to transfer. There can be reasons why they don't.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that point about teachers being motivated and having training and then finding it an obstacle to actually putting that into practice in their classroom is something that, that probably does happen. Another question, what ways exist to help teachers identify which areas of their teaching they should focus on developing?
Okay, so if we think about systemic professional development, which is what I've focused on, in other words, this is organized professional development, typically organized at the level very often of a country. So one program I worked on recently was 22,000 teachers across the country. That's very different to a situation where an individual teacher is thinking about their own professional development. So the focus of my talk has been on those sort of organized kinds of initiatives. Now, it is important even in those larger scale initiatives for those responsible for programs to have some sense of what teachers' needs are. Without that, it's difficult to understand on what basis the program is being designed. So some of the strategies that have been used on programs I've worked with are different forms of needs analysis. For example, teachers can be asked to complete some kind of self-assessment tool, some kind of self-assessment survey through which they identify the areas of competence they feel they need support with. Another strategy that is very often used is that teams of observers go out into schools and do some baseline observations to get a sense of what's actually happening in classrooms and to see what aspects of teaching and learning teachers need support with. But all of this also needs to be balanced against the broader needs of the education system. In other words, a teacher might say, I'd like to develop my competence in X, but X just happens not to be particularly relevant to the developmental plan of the institution, the district, or the country. And I think this is important to keep in mind, that large-scale professional development is being provided above all to improve the educational system. It's not something that's being done to enable teachers to pursue their own sort of individual hobbies, for want of a better word. At the level of individual teachers pursuing their own development, they can do that, of course. But when we're working at this larger level, there's always a bigger picture to keep in mind. But overall, it is essential for some kind of needs analysis to be done. And as I said, it can be done through some kind of surveys, through classroom observations. Sometimes the analysis of student test scores, student performance on national tests is also used to provide indicators of aspects of learner performance which need to be enhanced. So, for example, if learners' performance on speaking skill tests are particularly low, if we're talking about English, that might point to the need for professional development that improves teachers' competence to teach speaking. So I think there are various sources that can be drawn on, but the important point, and I thank whoever submitted this question for reminding us of this, that the design of professional development initiatives does need to be informed, in other words, based on some kind of needs analysis.
Thank you. And then you did talk about reflection. So reflection seems to be a key element in teacher development. But the question is, but what if the teachers don't know how to reflect? Is there any kind of framework on reflecting on the teaching and learning process?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I could talk about for hours, really, because it comes up a lot in my work. The typical situation is that a program plan makes reflection a central component of the process through which teachers are expected to develop. But there's limited awareness within the plan that for most teachers, reflection is a novel activity. There's limited awareness that reflection constitutes a set of skills that need to be learned. And very often the assumption is that all we need to do is tell teachers, go back to your classroom and reflect, and it will somehow happen magically, and that, development will ensue. And the reality is it just doesn't work in that way. And I've seen many programs fall short of their target simply because the challenges involved in developing reflection weren't recognized. So what I recommend to people is if they want to make reflection a central part of their program, and it's an extremely valuable thing to do, they need to make sure, A, that there's a clear understanding by those responsible for the program of what reflection entails. B, that is communicated clearly to everyone